This is a place where the oddities of nature take a place in your reality, where the supernatural is second hand, and the monsters and the freaks thrive over your wildest imaginations. This is Unsettling Stories.
I was 5 the first time Grandpa invited me into the basement to see his safe. It was massive. Apparently, the original owners told him the house had to be built around it. There was no way it could have been brought in afterwards. When I asked him what was inside, he just smiled and said, "Maybe I'll tell you when you're older." I remember being frightened by that smile. Everything about my grandfather frightened me. To be honest, I was never able to put my finger on why, but the feeling was real. I dreaded whenever Mom said we were going to visit. Every time Mom and I were there, his housekeepers would wait on us hand and foot. Even at the early age, I noticed how they seemed intimidated by my grandfather and were quiet, timid, and unwilling to speak unless they were spoken to. It was almost like they had been traumatized. When I was 13, I learned an unsettling fact about the housekeepers. They were actually, in fact, his wives. The grandmother I had known, who had died when I was very young, was merely one of 9. Mom didn't want to explain the whole thing to me. I could tell she was afraid of him too. When I asked why she had chosen to keep in touch with him after Dad died, she told me I needed a male figure in my life. It sounded strange to me, but I never pressed the issue. One day before my 16th birthday, Mom said Grandpa wanted to take me hunting. I absolutely hated the idea of being alone with my grandfather on his sprawling property, which comprised countless acres of dark, deep woods. But the addition of guns to that equally unpalpable scenario basically made it the last thing I ever wanted to do. I protested and argued and whined. Mom wouldn't have any of it. "He's done a lot for you over the years," she said. "You'll go, and you'll be polite." And that was that. Mom woke me up before dawn on my birthday and drove me the 2 hours it took to reach Grandpa's home. She didn't get out of the car. I knocked on the door, and one of his wives, Gert, ushered me into the kitchen, where there was already a hearty breakfast waiting for me. Despite not even being remotely hungry, I gnawed on some bacon and shoveled some eggs in my mouth. I didn't want Grandpa to get angry at Gert for making me food I didn't need. As I was finishing up, my grandpa came downstairs. Despite being in his 70s, he was strong and enormous. His 6x6 frame dwarfed me at merely 5'10", and he was over 300 pounds. He was more than twice my weight. As usual, he grinned and exposed his teeth that were too straight and too perfect for a man at his age. I tried and failed to prevent the goose flesh from rising from my spine. He greeted me with a cheery rendition of "Happy Birthday," his deep voice resonating through the cavernous kitchen. A smile that I meant did my best to make it look like I was deeply appreciative. He asked if I was finished eating, and I nodded. After instructing Gert to clean up the place, he put his massive right hand on my shoulder and told me to follow him. I trudged along as we walked across the house to the basement door. He flipped the light switch and we walked down the thick wooden stairs. He turned the corner at the bottom of the stairs and I immediately knew what he was going to show me. We stopped in front of the colossal iron safe. "I think you're ready to see what's got in here," Grandpa informed me. Excitement and fear churned in my breakfast-filled stomach. I had wondered what was in this safe for as long as I could remember. Now I was finally about to find out, and I was borderline terrified. What did he have in there that he needed to stay secret? I learned he was a polygamist and probably an abusive one. But he and my mother acted like it was a normal fact of life. What was so bad that he had to keep actively hidden from the world inside of a safe the size of a small car? Grandpa turned the old chrome-plated combination to lock a few times. I heard something unlatch from deep inside the iron bowels, and with a grunt of effort, he pulled open the heavy door. It let out the breath I had been unconsciously holding the whole time, and inside was an arsenal of firearms. Rifles, shotguns, pistols, countless boxes of ammunition. "John," he said, staring intently at my face, "some of these guns aren't even legal anymore. I'm showing them to you because you're family. I trust you. These will be yours someday. I don't want you to tell anyone about what's in here because I could get in a lot of trouble." I understood what he was saying, and I promised I wouldn't tell anything to anyone. "Good," he exclaimed. "Now pick one for yourself. We're going hunting." I didn't know anything about guns. I thought back on television shows I'd watched and tried to remember what hunters used in them. So I selected what looked like a long-looking rifle. "M1 Garand," Grandpa announced. "Excellent!" He pulled the gun from the safe, loaded it with ammunition, and handed it to me. "Keep it pointed at the ground and do not touch the trigger until you're ready to shoot something," he warned. He pulled another, similar-looking rifle from the safe, loaded it for himself, and picked out a small revolver which he loaded and stuffed into his front pocket. "Come on," he said cheerily. "Let's go for a walk." The morning was cold and the sun had barely started to rise. It was overcast and every so often a flake or two of snow would float to the ground in front of my face. I stared at the ground while my grandfather walked ahead of me. We walked at a brisk pace for what felt like an hour. The sun rose behind an overcast curtain, and its light barely penetrated the dense, coniferous canopy above us. The longer we walked, the more unnerved I became. It seemed like the day was getting darker, not brighter, as the density of the forest swallowed up nearly everything the shrouded sky could produce. I noticed animals as we walked, but they were all ignored by my grandpa. I wonder what it was we were hunting. We passed deer, squirrels, rabbits, even raccoons. I noticed I was growing tired, and walking in silence had become increasingly aware that we had walked almost the whole way back, too. I spoke up and asked where we were going and what we were hunting. Without turning around, Grandpa replied, "I'll be honest with you, John. We're not hunting anything. The bears like to roam around these woods, and I've seen a lot of them over the years. They never bothered me, but I want us to be prepared in case anything is different today." I just said, "Okay." But I wondered what the hell we were out here for in the first place if we weren't actually going hunting. But of course I didn't say that to my grandfather, though, so I just asked, "Are we near where we're going?" Grandpa stopped walking and turned around. That same unnerving smile plastered across his lined face. "Just on the other side of that rock formation," he pointed. "Let's go." Instead of going ahead, Grandpa slowed down and walked next to me. "You're a man now, John. Your father should be the one walking up with you, not me. But the good Lord saw it fit to take him when you were just a baby, though. So I knew I had to step up and show you what it meant to be a man." We stopped at the rock formation. "Climb on over. You'll see." Grandpa climbed up next to me. It wasn't steep, and the footing was pretty solid, so we moved pretty easily. But he kept talking. "Your mother told me a few years ago that you knew my housekeepers were actually wives. And that's okay. I worried you would honestly be confused, but you handled it surprisingly well. That maturity is what's important, not your age." We reached the top of the rock formation. I looked down at the forest and saw that steep slope as I climbed down with him. "It's your job as a man to claim any woman that you want." I almost thought about protesting, but I did not dare interrupt. So he continued, "They're yours. It's their duty to be there for you, to bear your children, to clean your house, and take care of whatever need you need." We climbed down in silence for a few minutes, as if he wanted to make sure I had time to reflect on the importance of what he just said. It wasn't long before we reached the forest floor and kept going. "When your father died," he started, his voice breaking quickly as he swallowed his emotions, "I was put in a difficult situation. He was my son, and my son embraced the tradition of all of our men in our family. Me, my father, and his father, and so on. The trees seemed to be much taller than they were before. The forest on the other side of the rock formation seemed to be older than anything I'd ever seen, and a lot darker, too. I had to squint just to see. Thankfully, though, I had snuck out my phone, but when I took a look at it, I saw it was almost 11 a.m. You have a unique family tree, John. Remember, your father respected the tradition of this family. That means your mother was not his only wife." The news made my head spin. I don't remember much about my dad, but I always thought he was a decent, caring person. Hearing that he was anything like grandfather was a sickening revelation. "Like I said, I was put in a difficult situation. Your father had 12 wives. For whatever reason, despite him getting them all pregnant, he only gave birth to one boy, through your mother." I felt mildly dizzy. "You mean I have sisters?" I asked, hating that my voice cracked an octave higher on that last syllable. 12 of them. One of your father's wives had twin girls." "Can I meet them?" My voice was back to its normal pitch. I sounded a little calm and oddly hopeful, despite the immense discomfort I just felt. "A woman's duty is to serve the men in her life, John. Your mom had you, so it became her duty to serve you. When your father died, your wives had no purpose anymore. They no longer had anyone to serve, and it's not like the daughters could have carried the family name." "I understand," I said, obviously not understanding. "So I'll never get to meet them?" "John, they lost their only purpose in life. The daughters can't carry the family name, so what reason was there to keep them?" I stared into my grandfather's eyes. Their intense blue was staring right back at me as it pierced through the darkness of the forest. As we stood and talked, the clouds had given way to some sunshine, and while it was still dark, I could see a little bit more than 10 feet in front of me. "I asked you a question, John. What purpose could they have led?" I shifted in place with the awkward, cute awareness of how uneasy and timid I must have looked to this giant man in front of me. It was obvious I needed to tell him what he needed to hear. "They didn't have any purpose at all, grandfather." The words felt disgusting as they came out of my mouth. His smile came back on his face. "Good boy, John." He spoke again. "Good." We stared out at the endless forest ahead of us, and I got ready to ask if we should start heading back before Grandpa spoke again. "I had to make things right after your father died," he pointed as he pulled it over his head. "Waste not, want not." As I stared upward, I felt the dread infuse all throughout my body. Grandfather kept his hand raised with his finger pointing up. I didn't want to look, but I craned my head and stared into the shadowy canopy, and it didn't take long before I could see it. I gasped at such force that I almost threw up. The skeletal bodies and ragged clothing hung from the branches above. There were some big, and there were some small, and there were some tiny. They were all dead. Long dead. "Looks like you get to meet your stepmothers and your stepsisters after all, John. I know you don't remember them, but they all loved you very much." Tears streamed down my face as my rage began to rise. "You did this?" I said. He said with pride in his voice, "Yes." He watched as I raised the rifle and pointed it square at his face. There's no need for that, John. That's why you're out here. I'm here to take care of everything, so you don't have to. Then he pulled the pistol out from the front of his pocket and held it up underneath his chin. I have done everything I needed to, John. We both know you're not going to shoot me, even if you knew how to use a rifle. But you will also report what happened here, and of course I will be arrested. But I'm going to make it a little easier on you, John, and take care of the ugly mess myself. He tightened the grip on his pistol. What I've told you will sink into you, John. You'll talk to your mother about it, as she's known all of this. She'll help you understand what you need to do. It's her job to, after all. And you'll see things my way as you get older. After all, every man in our family did. A breeze whistled through the trees above us. I heard the ragged dresses crinkle as the bodies clacked against one another. My mind wandered back to the poor women at grandfather's house. The women who had been abused for decades by this man and were thought to be nothing but property. The thought of how they had been so conditioned over the years to buy into the sickening tradition by this awful man and this awful family had prompted a horrifying realization in my head. Your wives, I choked out. What will happen to them? A repulsive smile gashed on his face as he spoke. They knew we were coming out here, John. And they knew that only you was coming back. I'm sure they took care of everything else while I was gone. A sob burst through my lips at the very thought of Gert's sad smile as she watched me eat my birthday meal that she had made me. The clicking of the gun's hammer cocked and brought me back to reality. I stared up into his eyes and I saw a look that I had only seen in animals that were about to maul their prey. Happy birthday, John. Don't ever forget the day you became a man, and don't forget what it means to be one. Tradition over all, John. Tradition over all. He took the gun from underneath his chin and put it to the side of his head. He squeezed the trigger and dropped heavily into the blanket of snow and pine needles behind him. Blood gushed out the side of his head as it ruined all of the snow. I just stood there, motionless, watching the life drain from his body. This giant of a man reduced to nothing but a corpse now. The sounds of the forest gradually replaced the ringing in my ears. I heard the birds chirp, squirrels chitter, the dresses flutter, and the bones of my family